Welcome to another episode of the Power Law Investor, episode number 10 of our weekly updates. Today is October 21st, 2024, a Monday. Again, this is not financial advice, this is for informational purposes only. And today we'll be talking about the progress of our weekly DCA into the Power Law assets, and we'll talk about kaspa in particular, and some of the things that we should be a little bit careful about, but also some of the things that we should be quite excited about. So to start off, let's just look at the current prices. Bitcoin is trading at a little above 67,000 and kaspa is trading just below 13 cents. Now, as a reminder, the power law is just the trend line of the price data relative to time in the log space. So in this graph over here for Bitcoin, we're looking at the Bitcoin price data, which is this blue line over here. And that line has a trend line, which is this orange trend line with a very good R squared fit of 0.9560, which means more than 95% of the variation in this line is explained, if the blue line is explained by the orange trend line, and it has this particular equation. And in the log plane, when we convert it to a linear plane, we are able to see now we have linear time in the x-axis and linear price in the y-axis. We can see that equation gets transformed into this form. And using this simple mathematics, this is not technical analysis, this is just a mathematically derived trend line. I can do it, you can do it, the answer would be the same. We can make an assumption that if the future is like the past, what sort of results and returns would we obtain? And based on that, we are currently expecting about a 60+% return on Bitcoin with an estimated price in 1 year's time of 111K. And it's important to note that this is just the trend. If it falls back on this orange line, it could go much higher. Like you can see in the past that these lines have gotten much higher, right? Have bounced much above the orange trend line, and even earlier this year too. But it does give us an idea like, hey, if what is expected to happen on average, all else being the same, if we averaged out all the highs and the lows together. And now Bitcoin and kaspa are the only two cryptos that have this R squared of greater than, here's the kaspa line, this R squared of greater than 0.95, which means much of the variation in price is explained by this line. And again, if it does keep on following what has happened in the past into the future, then we can make predictions on what's going to happen. So like I said, this is where the prices of Bitcoin and kaspa are here today. What we've been doing in the Power Law Investor portfolio is every day we've been investing $100 and using an algorithm that allows us to split between cash, between kaspa and Bitcoin, and making investment decisions using that algorithm. So currently the algorithm has given us a target allocation of about 64% to kaspa, 16% to Bitcoin, and 20% to cash. And the way this algorithm works is by looking at what the potential returns are. Right now, the kaspa annual return is about 600%, which is a lot. The Bitcoin annual return is 61%. And obviously, if we think that we're going to get a bigger return from kaspa versus Bitcoin, then we'll be allocating more of our resources towards the kaspa side of things. However, because we have much fewer days of data for the kaspa, 874 versus 5,209 for Bitcoin, we have to take that reliability also into account. And that's what this algorithm does. It takes that into account and gives us an allocation taking into account the return and the reliability, that is the confidence that we have in making this happen. We also have an allocation to cash. And as you can see, these allocations to cash are what have happened here in these three limit orders, and I'll get into that. And the answer is because crypto is so volatile, we may get buying opportunities, and we definitely want to have some cash available for those buying opportunities. And that's what sort of happened over the last month, since the beginning of October. We've had limit orders that were filled at just above 14 cents, just above 13 cents, and also just above 12 cents, which was very surprising. I didn't think that we would get down to the near 12 cents, but we did. And fortunately, with this strategy, the DCA plus cash for opportunity strategy, we were able to kick in those limit orders. Now, if we look at what the overall spend has been, we started off at $10,000, investing $100 every day. And now 3,700 of those dollars are still left. We've accumulated a fair amount of Bitcoin, and we've also accumulated a fair amount of kaspa. And on average, even though we're running at a loss of about 5%, our average Bitcoin price is 60,000, just about 61,000, and the average kaspa price is about 14.5 cents. So when we're investing every day, when the price goes down, we end up buying more. When the price goes up, we end up buying less. So it pulls the price down for us. In addition, with kaspa, with the cash that we have these limit orders placed, right? And these limit orders, they were based on a combination of the power law analysis, but just also relatively close to integer numbers of cents, where I thought we might reach and maybe bounce off. And so far they have worked out quite well. And we had a bunch of available cash from the 20% of the DCA that we were putting in, so $20 every day, as you can see in the spreadsheet. But then on the 17th, 18th, this order kicked in for the limit when kaspa hit below around 12 cents. And so that also helps pull the price down. Now, of course, all this is conditional on the price going back to trend as time goes on. But let's talk a little bit about what's happening with Bitcoin so far. Bitcoin, we're now trading around 69,000, maybe a little 67,000 today, right now, as I'm making this video. And the trend line says that we should be about 78,000 or so. There are periodicities in Bitcoin, so it's not surprising that it hasn't reached the trend line as yet. I expect that it will do in the future at some point, but it may spend quite a bunch of time below the trend line as it did over here. And again, no one really knows, but we're just trying to play the average trend, right? We're saying that it's going to revert back to the mean sort of thing. So with Bitcoin, here we are. Our expected return with Bitcoin is going to be about 60% for this next 12 months. So by the 21st of October 2025, and that is a pretty solid good return. So for those of you who are not interested in kaspa or in getting higher returns by taking on more risk potentially, this is what your expectation for the return of Bitcoin should be, which is going to be fantastic. So I still think investing in Bitcoin just by itself would also be a pretty good return on investment, and I'm expecting it to be north of 60%. It's not going to be in a straight line. It never is. If you have this sort of volatility and this sort of return, it's not going to be a nice smooth line. You're going to have lots of variations up and down, but that is why you get the upside. On kaspa, we again have that same power law trend line. It is described quite well. But now we have an interesting situation because we have a return value, that is your expected return in 1 year's time, is around 600%, which is fantastic. But on the other side of it, you see that it is trading below its trend line for quite a period of time. In fact, let's go to this other graph over here, where you can see that the last time that it was near the trend, maybe around August, but really around July, beginning of July. And since then, it's been below the trend line. And not only below the trend line, it's gone past the minus 50% of the trend line. So whatever the trend line number is, we divide that by half. And that value today should be around 14.4 cents or so, right? There we go, 14.4 cents. And today it's trading at about 13.3 cents, or if you look at the latest value, we are at below 13 cents. So the question always becomes is, do we still have faith in this? Do I still think that it's going to come back to this orange trend line? And that's one of those things in which we really need to take a step back and look at the entirety of the data, right? Like, so if we look at this over here, is it a buying opportunity? Are we catching a falling knife, or does it just collapse down to some number that's going to be very small? And so no one can really answer that question, but we can take, because I can't predict the future, you can't predict the future. If I could predict the future, I wouldn't be making these videos, right? I'd just be making gazillions in the crypto market. And people will come up with all sorts of scenarios. But the way I find that is most convincing, or the way that I find is a balanced way to look at the situation, is to take a step back and look at this graph, right? This is the graph for kaspa since its inception. You're looking at the price data and the trend line through it. Now, with all this background of 874 days, do we think there is a reasonable chance for kaspa to get back to the trend line? And my answer to that is yes, but let's say I'm wrong, right? Let's say I think it's a crapshoot. It's a 50-50 chance whether it goes back to the trend line and goes to zero. In that case, you can still do a reasonable analysis by saying, okay, the expected return is 600%. Let's assume half the time and half the possible worlds, it has a 0 return. And half the time you get the 600% return. That still means you'd end up with about a 300% return. So that means for every dollar that you're putting in, you'd end up getting $3 in profit back. And that's throwing in a 50% discount right now. Is that reasonable? I think it's reasonable. I've taken a 50% haircut, and even then I end up with a 300% return. That is a good risk to reward ratio for me. Would I like it to be higher? Sure. But unfortunately, Bitcoin and kaspa are the only two crypto assets and assets in general that I know that follow this sort of power law. So there's always a chance that you end up with nothing. But on average, even if you take a 50% discount, you'd be ending up with 300%, which is a really, really solid return. So with that in mind, that is what the strategy for the power law investor has been. We are discounting the fact that we don't have as much reliable information about kaspa over here, but we keep on purchasing that kaspa every day. And if the bet works out, that's fantastic. But if it doesn't work out, I wouldn't bet the entire house on it. Just take a section of your portfolio and keep that allocated following this power law investor allocation. But you can see these are the sorts of returns that I am anticipating following this methodology. So a couple of things to point out, particularly on Bitcoin and kaspa, because it feels right now, here's kaspa relative to Bitcoin, and it feels it's sort of stabilized here at this point, right? So the higher this graph goes, that means the higher the value of kaspa relative to Bitcoin. The lower it goes, the better Bitcoin is doing relative to kaspa. So we were at this stage and we were going down, 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 but I suspect we have sort of stabilized from about, maybe the middle of October or so, or maybe the last 4 or 5 days. So we seem to be holding quite steady at this point. Similarly, when we look at kaspa versus the altcoin market, we had dropped down and we were dropping down, 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 but we seem to have stabilized right here somewhat. I'm not sure why we've had this period of underperformance. It could be because of the KRC20 tokens, the meme coins and things that have been releasing on the kaspa network, and that's causing some of the energy and attention that was being directed to kaspa is now moving on to the meme coins on the kaspa network. In the long run, I suspect if that's the case, it won't matter, but I don't know for sure if that is what the driver is. But regardless, the data tells us that we've had a period of underperformance, which means that if it bounces back, this is going to be a great place to be investing in. If the trend continues, you're trying to catch a falling knife, right? So everyone has to make their own balance on that. The one caveat I think that is really important at this point, which is why I have placed this limit order at 1152, is that I am not convinced that Bitcoin is going to shoot up, accelerate upwards. I think there's a scenario in which Bitcoin just keeps on going up from where it is right now. And that would be fantastic because we have an allocation to Bitcoin, and that would pull kaspa up with it also in most of the altcoin market. And we could see some fantastic gains. But while I think that is going to happen in the long term, in the short term, we might experience another drop. As you can see here, the last time that we had these rate cuts, we did have some upward action in Bitcoin, and then we dropped down quite a bit. And we might be experiencing this, we might experience the same thing this time. So I don't think it's something that we can discount that possibility. I would estimate that there's at least a 40% chance that we end up going down. I can't give you the exact numbers. I'm just sort of basing it like this could happen or that could happen. But if it does happen, then we are going to get the rest of the crypto market is going to be pulled down also. So kaspa, which is sitting nice and pretty, not really nice and pretty actually, but about 13 cents or so, we could easily see lower prices if you imagine that Bitcoin drops down into the mid or low 50s, for example, or even lower. So I think that's a definite possibility. And so with that in mind, it's important that we keep our reserves. We don't know if that's going to happen for sure. I don't know if it's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to happen. Nobody knows if it's going to happen. But in case it happens, we have some cash on hand to take advantage of those lower prices. And if it doesn't happen, we continue to DCA in at a daily amount of $100. And that gives us enough exposure to the market. One interesting thing that I'll point about is that when the limit orders kick in, they do have the impact of pulling the kaspa price, the average kaspa price paid down, right? So I've been DCAing in, and we had a DCAing price about 0.152 cents. But when we ended up getting this big order, then the limit order kicked in at a lower value. It really pulled the price down. And so one improvement that I can already see, that it pays to be more patient than waiting to DCA in because of all the crypto volatility that's going on. So right now, the target allocation is about 20% to cash. If I were to do it again, I might have kept that to be 30 or even 40%, because when the price goes down, that is the time to hit it and hit it hard. So for your own calculations and for your own estimate, if you are willing to be patient, and it's not easy just to sit on your hands and just wait for the right price to hit, you might decide to keep a larger allocation to cash. For this purpose, I'm just keeping it at 20%, but your mileage may be different and everyone's investment situation is different. And again, this is not investment advice, but you may want to consider having a larger cash allocation. So that's where we're at right now. Let's see what's going to happen in the next week. I would say in the next few months, we will see kaspa trend back to the trend line, and also Bitcoin to trend back to the trend line. I'd say that's looking at a 3-4 month horizon. But again, I don't know the future. That is just my guess. And I think we're going to see some good returns. And as always, I will keep on making these videos regularly. So please like and subscribe if you find this to be helpful, and write some comments below as to what else you'd like to see. So cheers from now, and see you on the next one.